I do believe as a historian that the wealth of New York to this day has been made on the sweat and the exploitation of people of color. Okay, let's get started. The question we're pursuing is the same question now, which is after the American Revolution, and I'm sorry this upset Christian, but I'll say it, Christian, you don't have to listen. After the American Revolution, New York was destroyed. It burned and had lost a significant number of people. Within 60 years after the Revolution, New York had passed Boston and Philadelphia and became the premier city in the United States. By 1849, more than 3,000 ships sailed or steamed into New York's harbor from more than 150 ports. Now follow this one, carrying 50% of our nation's imports. So within 60 years after the revolution, by 1849, half of the imports of the nation's imports were coming into the port of New York. New York had become the premier city. And the question we're pursuing in this class is why? How did that happen? What happened? We know where it happened. We know when it happened. But we are pursuing the question of why and how and what. And in the last two classes, we looked at Alexander Hamilton as one of the causes. And now today and Thursday, we're going to look at slavery as one of the causes. And let me just throw this out. Has anybody in this class ever thought of New York City making its money and being so wealthy because of slavery? Is this new information? You can put it in the chat if you want. I just don't know if anybody before taking this class had any thoughts about slavery in New York.
Yes, I have.
You had, and what were your thoughts about slavery in New York, Christian?
Well, I never thought that slavery was also included in New York.
Yeah. And does anybody else feel that was a surprise when they saw that or when they heard me say it? Anybody else get that kind of surprise? Like, what? New York slavery? I mean, who ever heard of this? Anybody else want to comment on that before I go on? Anyone want to put it in the chat? Or Tiffany, good, thank you. Anybody else want to put a thought? What's that?
I thought slaves were only like in the South.
You thought slavery was, yes. Oh, Joseph, hello. I'm so glad you're here. And you're feeling good. My heart is warm just to see that you're here.
Well, thank you.
Welcome. I'm on your team, you know that. All right. Nice to see you. And say what you have to say again, Joseph.
I thought like slavery was only like in the South, like the southern side of the country.
Yes, and that's what we were taught in all of our schooling. That's what we see in the media. Slavery is in Alabama. Slavery is in Mississippi. Slavery is in New Orleans, right? It's the South. They were these terrible people. They had slavery, but we in New York, we're so good. We're progressive. We're liberal. You know, we all are great people, believe in equality and all that. Well, I'm telling you, there's a long history of inequality and oppression in New York City. There's a long history of benefiting on the labor of Black people, of people of color. And you can write this down and quote me. You ready for this? I do believe as a historian that the wealth of New York to this day has been made on the sweat and the exploitation of people of color. Now you can say RKL after that, but I really think as a historian, I'm gonna just say it. I'm just gonna say it. Louis, hello.
Hello, Professor. Sorry, I came late. I was at the supermarket.
Did you buy good stuff?
Yeah, I brought some groceries.
All right. Can I get a wave?
Oh, no, I don't have the camera right now, sorry.
You have your camera? Okay. Nice that you're here. And Saima writes, I can't believe New York City has slaves. I wonder why we never learned this in school. You have any guesses, Simon, on why they never taught this in school, and why I'm the first one to talk about slavery in New York?
I mean, I can't think of any reason why they wouldn't like explain this to us. When you first mentioned it in class, I was very, very shocked.
Yeah, well, the short answer is that there's an investment in glorifying our past. And it's not just New York. If you interviewed, Simon, if you interviewed your grandparents or your parents about their life and about their history, the first time you interviewed them, they would give you a glorious, really, oh, this was great when I was young, and this was great, and I used to do this. But then when you push into the real history of everybody in this class, you find that there were problems in the past, and that there's things that people don't like to talk about, and there was real trouble, even in family history. And so New York is not different from all of your families, including my own family, in terms of, I'll put it this way, we kind of hide it. We put it underneath the rug. We don't talk about it. I'll tell you one story. I don't know if I told you all this. It wasn't until I was interviewing my grandmother, Molly, my mother's mother, about her life, when she told me that as a teenage girl, she was a prostitute. I went insane. You imagine? You're interviewing your grandmother and she tells you that she was a prostitute? I went, oh my gosh, Grandma Molly, what is this? And she explained to me she was living on the Lower East Side in a Jewish community. She was poor, her family was poor. And right next door to the Lower East Side was Chinatown. And there were restrictions on the Asian community that only the men could come in. They didn't allow, the Asian Exclusion Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act said only men could come in for work. They didn't allow women in. And so there you had Chinatown right next to the Lower East Side, filled with Chinese men. And right next door was the Jewish Lower East Side. And as my grandma explained it to me, to pick up some cash and to pick up some money for the family, she every now and then would be a prostitute. And I went nuts. I then asked my sister and my brother, and they all said they had known the story but never told me. So it's a personal story, but you get it. And if you push your own family histories, you'll find out that there is this kind of thing that I'm saying about New York in a larger context, that we erase the bad, that history tends to erase the bad. And if you get it, just put a thumb up. If you understand what I'm saying, just put a thumb up or put it in the chat, or somehow give me some feedback that you get it, because I just revealed myself and I feel a little embarrassed. So, yes.
I'm guessing that the actual Americans were embarrassed of the slaves due to the fact that the slaves were the ones who actually created New York.
I want you to say that again, Christian, because I totally agree with you. You said it so well, and it's quotable, as it's your thought, but it's quotable. So anybody who wants to quote Christian, write this down. Say it again, Christian.
I'm guessing that the Americans were ashamed of the slaves because they were the ones who created New York.
And I would emphasize, I love the word you used, that they were ashamed.
They were both ashamed and embarrassed of including the slaves as Americans and as a New Yorker.
Yes, brilliant. And anybody want to quote Christian or write it in their own words to answer what Simon was saying about how surprised, to answer what I'm saying about this class, is that it has so much to do with shame and embarrassment, and so much of history gets erased because of shame and embarrassment. And just to bring it to a personal level, I think that's why my grandmother Molly didn't tell me until I was older and I was interviewing her, that she was a bit ashamed and a bit embarrassed just picking up on Christian's words. So Christian, thumbs up to you.
And one more thing, Professor.
Yes.
Due to the fact that these Americans were ashamed and embarrassed, they didn't want to include the slaves as a human, but as property.
You're so right. And even in the, and I'll add to that, even in the United States Constitution, when it was first written, that it was said in the Constitution that the slaves, people of color, Black people, would be considered 3/5 of a person when they were calculating the number of people to represent your community. And today in the newspaper, you'll read that because of the census, they're redistricting and the House of Representatives is going to change. You can read that article. But when the House of Representatives was measured and counted, the slaves, people of color, Black people, were counted as 3/5 of a person. So if you had, what?
Because I was going to see that as well.
Say that again?
Thank you, because I was going to talk about that as well. How can they count 3 people out of 5 as a vote?
Oh, Christian, you're great. You're great.
I'm
You're
thinking they
great.
were
You're great.
ashamed.
You're great.
More
Well,
than ashamed, they were embarrassed to include the slaves as humans.
perfect, perfect, perfect. So, moving on from this introduction, everybody should have received, and if you didn't, you should have received the questions. Oleg, could we just do a quick share screen to show the questions that everybody should have received? I sent out a revised questions, 7 questions, and Oleg will show them to you now. So everybody should have gotten this. Okay, if you didn't get this, then in the chat, send Oleg a note and we'll make sure you get a copy of this, because as you know, this is going to become part of your homework assignment. So very important to have these 7 questions. And to help you answer those questions, I'm going to do a brief presentation about slavery in New York in this time period, and then we'll look at the reading. But before I do, just if you want to put it in the chat, you can. Does anybody have any questions on anything that's been said before I sort of start a brief presentation about slavery and New York City? Anybody want to ask me a question either in the chat or verbally? So I'll take the silence as we're all good and I should move on. Okay, Oleg, you can get rid of the questions and so I can see everybody, or at least see everybody's names. And we'll go back to a non-shared screen. Okay, so this is RKL addressing what Saima's surprised about, what Christian is upset about, which is this whole issue of how could I even say that the wealth of New York City from the past up to the present was totally dependent on the sweat and work of enslaved people. Okay, I'm going to say a few words about this. You can take notes and you can stop me at any time and ask me questions. Basically, what I'm going to be saying and what I'm about to say is that New York took control of the entire cotton industry. That cotton was being cultivated in the South, picked by slave labor, right, and sent off to the British textile towns in places like Manchester, right, to be made into cloth. And the key change, the key revolution, the key change in the entire flow of cotton and labor and the manufacturing has to do with one person, and that change came about because of a guy named Eli Whitney. Now, I'm sure in some of your high school classes and some of you heard of the cotton gin, right? Put your thumbs up if you've ever heard of this term, the cotton gin. Anybody ever heard of the cotton gin before I mentioned it today? Nobody. Whoa, nobody. Okay. Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin. What did the cotton gin do? The cotton gin removed the seeds. A bowl of cotton is filled with these little black seeds. and it takes a lot of time to remove them. But he invented the cotton gin, or the cotton engine, and then it's called the gin, but it's the cotton engine. And this is mechanization, a way of removing those seeds. And it creates a boom to the cotton industry. The measurement of that boom is that in 1796, you may want to write this down, we export out of the South 6 million pounds of cotton. 1796, before the cotton gin, they're exporting 6 million pounds of cotton. After the invention of the cotton gin, by 1804, if you do the math, that's only, what, 8 years later, we're exporting 35 million pounds of cotton. Okay, so cotton, because of the cotton gin, because of Eli Whitney and the invention of the cotton engine, because of the invention of a machine that can pick out these little seeds, cotton, and you can write this down, became a major export and becomes, and you can write, this is something you can write down because you won't believe this, cotton becomes the single most valuable export out of the United States, and it's all based on slave labor. That is amazing. That is wild. It becomes this, I'm going to say it again because it's so important. It becomes the single most valuable US export, and it's all based on slave labor. So then how does New York City get its way into this trade? How does New York City find its way when all of this is being done in the South? All of this is being done by slave labor down in the South. The manufacturing is over in places like Manchester. So how did New York City figure out how to get itself involved? I'm going to tell you, and then we'll read about it. The obvious city, if you really think about this, the obvious city to prosper in the cotton trade would have been New Orleans. It's at the mouth of the Mississippi. There was a cheap and easy way by raft to get the cotton downriver. But New Yorkers are so smart. New York diverts this trade and captures the profit that should have gone to New Orleans and reroutes the entire industry, reroutes the entire trade in cotton to New York City. How do we do it? How does New York City become the center of this market? Well, one of the ways we do it is that we don't have a slave society. We do have slaves, but we also have a consumer society. So one of the things you can write down, and it's starting to answer question 2, I think, or question 2 and 3. We have a consumer society. I've said this before in this class. New York is developing a wage society. In addition, that we do have slaves here, but we'll talk about that later in terms of how that's sort of starting to stop in New York. But the slave societies in the South, they don't have the money. They don't have the consumers. And when the British manufacturers are buying cotton and they're sending boats over to pick up the cotton, they also want to bring manufactured goods over to sell. But there's nobody in the South to buy the cloth. There's nobody in the South to buy there's no market to buy the product coming out of Manchester, coming out of Liverpool. And New York basically sends the signal, we have a market. We have immigrants coming over here with some money. We have a wage earning class. We can buy your goods. So one way New York starts to put itself into this trade route is saying, if you come here, you'll be able to drop off your manufactured goods before you head south to pick up the cotton. And the British manufacturers start to figure out, that's not a bad idea. We got these boats going anyway. Let's go to New York. We'll sell our manufactured goods, and then we'll go down the coast and pick up the cotton. So one way New York wedges its way into this is by the consumer class, okay? Another second way that New York gets itself involved is because New York has money. New York has financial resources. New York has finances, and we saw this with Hamilton and the Assumption Act. New York has banks, and New York has banks to finance the trade, to finance the transactions. And all New York bankers need is bills of exchange. Does anybody know what a bill of exchange is before I define? Anybody want to jump in and say anything about what is a bill of exchange? Anybody who's been in business or is a business major, do you know what this is? You want to put it in the chat or just say it?
It's just like a note, like a
It's-
note that you're buying something.
Exactly right, Ivan. So Ivan, let's just play this out. Let's say that you are buying something from me, okay? Let's say you're buying cotton. You're a manufacturer in Manchester, right? And you're buying cotton from me. I'm selling you my cotton. And Carmela, you're a New York banker, okay?
Dope.
Okay, so Ivan, you buy the cotton from me. I send you the cotton, right? But you're not going to pay me right away. You're going to take 30 days or 90 days. You know, you're not going to, it's not cash, right?
Right.
All right. So, but I have an agreement with you. We have a piece of paper called a bill of exchange, which basically I've sent you cotton and you sign the bill of exchange saying, okay, Lieberman, thanks for the cotton. I'll pay you in 30 days or I'll pay you in 90 days. That's the bill of exchange. Okay. Now, in the South, I'm in Mississippi, right? I don't have a lot of money. I'm running a plantation. I'm not making much money, but I have this bill of exchange that Ivan said he's going to pay me in 90 days, right? And he's bought $1,000 worth of cotton. I made that up. I go to Carmela. Carmela, you're a banker in New York, okay? And I bring this bill of exchange to you. And I say, look, Carmela, Ivan's pretty good. He's going to pay me. Will you give me the money on this bill of exchange right now in cash? And what do you say to me, Carmela? You're a banker. What do you say to me?
I don't know. I'm kind of sus. I'm like, maybe, sure.
Yeah, maybe, sure. And you're thinking, how can I make money on this, right?
Right.
So how are you going to make money? I got a bill of exchange, right?
Uh-huh.
It's worth $1,000. Ivan has promised to pay in 90 days, and I bring it to you and I say, Carmela, can you give me some money for this? What do you say to me?
Like, give him the loan or what? Like,
Charge
Yeah,
interest.
What's that?
yeah, I was gonna say, can I charge interest? Like, can
Yes.
I get money off of it?
That's it. She's got it. That's the way New York bankers think. Carmela says to me, okay, Lieberman, okay, you need the money, you need the $1,000. I'll give you $900 for this piece of paper. Okay. And now Ivan owes me the 1,000. Right? So now I've paid 10% interest to you. Right? All of a sudden you've given me 900, you got a piece of paper that's worth $1,000. And so when Ivan pays in 90 days, you make $100 and you didn't do anything. All right? And that's what a bill of exchange is. And I'll take it one more level, and this is confusing. Carmela could take this bill of exchange and start trading it with other bankers. It can become like a stock. It can become some kind of currency. And it's today called futures. I mean, it's all kinds of financial manipulations that go on. But all you have to know for this course is that the role Carmela's playing as a New York banker is wedging her way into this trade route where the Southern planter is selling to a Liverpool or Manchester manufacturer. And New York has no business in this, right? It's between me in the South and Ivan in Manchester or Liverpool. But Carmela finds out Lieberman needs money and says, give me the bill of exchange. Give me the IOU that Ivan said I'll pay you in 30 days or 90 days. And I'll give you, no, I'm not going to give you the 1,000 he owes you. I'll give you 900 and I'll pick up $100. And that's how bankers make a fortune on this. Now, who doesn't understand that? ask questions to me, Ivan, or Carmela. Sarkar, go. Sarkar, do you have a question?
No.
No?
It's
Huh?
almost like right now this system of mortgage is also a bill of exchange.
Yes, yes, yes. It's very much in the same system. It's basically you're going to pay back, right, more than you get, right?
Yeah.
So right. You're thinking the right way. You're thinking the right way. Okay. Anybody else want to jump in with a question? Does everybody understand what we just played out? We good? Can I get a thumbs up from somebody so somebody shows me that they understand it? Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. The banker, Carmela understands it. Tiffany, Daisy. Okay, thank you. Okay, so New York also, in addition to the banking, New York also develops insurance companies. And they start to insure the cargo of the cotton going from, let's say, Mississippi or Alabama or New Orleans. They also sell you insurance so that if the boat gets captured by pirates, if the boat burns, if the boat, sinks, New York starts to develop an insurance company to insure the cargo on the boat. So New York wedges its way again into this trade, right? Where it really didn't belong, saying we'll provide the money, we'll insure the boats, we'll also lure those boats to New York before they go south so you can sell your manufactured goods. All right, so this one you got to write down. This one everybody's got to write down because you won't believe it. I'm going to say it twice. All right, you ready? Eventually, 40 cents of every dollar paid for Southern cotton, I'm getting emotional just saying it, 40 cents of every dollar paid for Southern cotton ended up in the pockets of a New York City merchant. I'm going to say that again. 40 cents of every dollar paid for Southern cotton ended up in the pocket of a New York City merchant. And that leads me to the final statement, which I said before. Slavery was the basis of New York's wealth in the 19th century. I'm going to say it again. Slavery was the basis of New York's wealth in the 19th century. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Professor?
Yeah, Christian, I know this is upsetting you.
Oh, no. It's a question.
Yeah.
What does the word merchant mean?
What does the word merchant mean? I love your questions. You're so good. What does the word merchant mean? Anybody want to jump in and answer that? Brian, you want to give it a shot?
A merchant?
Yeah, what's a merchant? It's a great question.
Isn't
A seller.
Oh, sorry.
Huh?
A seller.
Sorry, Brian, you could answer.
A seller? Narissa,
That's
you
all
want to
right. You
answer
can
that?
jump in, Marissa.
Yeah, go ahead, Narissa.
I was gonna say that isn't a merchant like a person who's involved in wholesale trade,
Yeah, exactly.
dealing with foreign countries?
In what?
A person dealing in like wholesale trade, especially in like foreign countries.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Person involved in wholesale trade, person involved with foreign countries, a person involved in buying and selling. But, Brian, jump in on this. We used to call the grocery store around the corner a merchant. How about you?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Same thing, a merchant.
Yeah, I can remember, referring to the store around the block. I mean, I think Narissa's right. It's usually merchants are usually sort of somebody involved in trade, buying and selling, but
In foreign countries.
yeah, but if you think about it, it's also commonly used, Christian, to refer to the people running the store around the corner. They're merchants, they're buying and selling, right? So it's anybody in business involved in the transaction of goods who has goods to sell. It could be a box of rice around the corner. It could be a can of soda, but it's a merchant. Someone who's taking product and making a profit by charging you more than they paid for it. How'd I do, Christian?
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else want to make a comment? Everybody understand my little presentation? Jason, I'm going to ask you a question. What about what I just said surprised you or made you curious, or what did you find the most important thing that I just said in my little presentation?
When you said the last part, the you said it was very important. I thought it was very important that eventually 40 cents of every dollar paid for Southern Con ended up in the pocket of an NYC merchant. Like, that's crazy because 40 cents is a lot from a dollar. So taking that is, I don't know, I just find that crazy.
Yeah. Can you just take the word crazy and give me a sentence below that in terms of how it felt to you internally? Because I like the word crazy because it means it stirred you. So give me a sentence about what it did to your soul, your intellectual soul.
Um, so it's like, it's basically like, if I just found it interesting because, like, if I sold you something and then I found out that most of my profit isn't even gonna, like, a big chunk of my profit isn't even gonna come to.
I can't hear you. You having audio problems or am I having audio problems?
Oh, I think it's me.
Okay, so you were saying it's if a big part of your profit, that's where I ended up. Say that again.
It's like I said, it was like, if I sold you something, but then I knew a big part of my profit wasn't gonna come back to me, that would be like worrisome, you know?
Yeah, and let me just take it one more step. There you are, you own a plantation, you're in Mississippi, and 40 cents of the dollar is going up to New York. Woo-hoo!
Yeah, that's kind of a lot too. So it's just like, oh my gosh, that's stressful.
Yeah, and also it says a lot about how shrewd New York was. You know, if you think about it, New York sort of wedges its way into this place where it should never have been, and makes off with a lot of money, a lot of money. It's wild. Yes.
That means that whoever got the 40% will be making either $1 or $2 less than what the other person is making.
Yeah, but they're not doing anything. All they're doing, I mean, there's Carmela, she's the banker, and she's just sitting there issuing paper. She's not running a plantation.
So good.
What?
Sounds great.
Well, you're a true
I
New
don't
Yorker.
have to do anything.
Huh?
I don't have to do anything.
Well, you know, the one thing you're doing is which is part of being an entrepreneur, is you're a bit of a risk taker, Carmela, in this whole thing. New Yorkers are risk takers. What's the risk that you're taking as the banker?
I suppose trusting that like the bill is valid.
And what do you mean by that? Give me more than the word valid.
Like that the loan could be paid off. Like,
yeah, that Ivan might not pay.
Yeah. So like what happens if he doesn't? Like what is it that screws me over, right?
Yeah, you got it. That's the gamble. That's your gamble. That's your risk. That's why
I love it.
Yes, New Yorkers love it. That's what I mean. That's why people go to the racetrack. I mean, that's what we do in New York. The word is entrepreneurs. We're risk takers. You're counting on the fact that Ivan's going to pay, and that's how you're going to make your money. You're taking a risk.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you hiring?
Am I what?
Are you hiring?
My hiring to do what? What are you talking about?
For people to do that?
Oh, for people to do that. Well, New York has filled with entrepreneurs. I'll tell you that. I'm not hiring any, but I mean, I'm a school teacher, so I'm not a banker, but I think there's plenty of room in New York for risk. I'll say that. I'll say that. Okay, let's look at the questions and the reading. And Oleg, let's go to the handout of 15A and page 335. And go down to the paragraph which says prior. Scroll down a bit, Oleg. Go, 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 go. Let's see. Hold on. For wealthy and well-connected, keep going. Okay, go up a little bit more. See this word prior? Let that go up a little bit more. Let's go up a little bit more. Okay, so now we're looking at page 335 of the handout. And we're looking at question 1, which is why was the cotton gin so important? We're in Gotham, page 335. We're down at the 1, 2, actually in the middle of the 3rd paragraph. And Carmela, you want to do a little reading for us? You see the word prior?
Sorry, what?
It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down. It's all the way over to the right.
Yeah.
Prior to 1790.
And where do I stop?
Start there, prior to 1790.
Prior to 1790, North America had supplied relatively little of Britain's voracious demand for cotton, in part because the time-consuming work of removing seeds from the lint made it commercially less attractive than other cash crops. Only scattered shipments passed through New York in the 1780s and early 1790s, city merchants shunning it as a dull article.
Go ahead.
Keep going?
Yeah.
Then in 1790,
you're at the most dramatic moment. I mean, good we know what the word merchant means, and good we know that before Eli Whitney, it was a time-consuming process. Now we're at the payoff paragraph that really gives the answer to question 1. So take us to the payoff. Go.
In 1792 or 1793, a Connecticut inventor named Eli Whitney devised the hand crank mechanism, afterwards called it the cotton engine or gin, that did the job quickly and cleanly. Virtually overnight, the production of cotton below the Mason-Dixon line doubled, then doubled again. In 1796, over 6 million pounds were exported from the United States, the bulk of it to Great Britain. By 1804, cotton exports had climbed to 35 million pounds, and British manufacturers were buying more cotton from the United States than Britain's own colonial possessions. Cotton suddenly became a major component of American trade with the former mother country, and it was on the way to becoming the nation's single most valuable export.
All right, Carmela, what you just read, what's the takeaway? What's the most important phrase, sentence? What's your takeaway, what you just read?
I think that the most important thing is the 6 million pounds of cotton exported, and also that cotton became the major component of American trade.
A+.
No.
It bears repeating. So the 2 things that Carmela is emphasizing is this change in the export from 6 million and then 8 years later to what are the numbers again? I'm trying to find it. Cotton exports, right, climbed to what?
35 million.
35 million. So you got to write that down somewhere. That's amazing. That's amazing. In 8 years, it goes from 6 million to 35 million pounds, all because of Eli Whitney's invention. What was the second thing you highlighted?
That cotton became a major component of American trade.
And if you were in your answer, if you were going to give me a quote from Gotham, give me the quote to back what you just set up. What's the quote you'd use?
The quote I would use, I would say, cotton suddenly became a major component of American trade with the former mother country, and it was on the way to becoming the nation's single most valuable export.
Perfect. That is the quote. The nation's single most valuable export. It's chilling. All based on slave labor. Mason-Dixon line, anyone gonna try to define that, or should I jump? Anyone wanna jump in and explain what it means to be, what that means, the Mason-Dixon line? So you hear it many times. Mason and Dixon were surveyors, and they drew a line to settle the boundary dispute between Pennsylvania and Maryland. And it's the border between Pennsylvania and Maryland. And if you extend that line over to the Ohio River and then follow the Ohio River, it is traditionally, when people say, oh, below or above the Mason-Dixon line, it means the separation of the North versus the South. It is the line that separates the country to this day. I would say if you took that line, you would see the division of the northern part of the United States and the southern part of the United States. So when people refer to the Mason-Dixon line, they're referring to a surveyor's line, two guys, one named Mason and the other Dixon, now called the Mason-Dixon line. It settled the border dispute between Pennsylvania and Maryland, and it now is that line that goes along the bottom border of Pennsylvania. If you extend it over, you hit the Ohio River, and you follow that. If you took a red pen or a blue pen and trace that, you would be drawing the Mason-Dixon line. Above it is what we consider to this day the North, and below Mason-Dixon line is what we consider to this day the South. Just want to define that for you. Okay, any questions on how to answer question one? Why was the cotton gin so important? The reading, Carmela, thank you so much for the reading. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Anybody have any questions on, everybody feel fine about answering question one? We good? Okay, Oleg, scroll up to New Orleans shipped out more cotton than any other American city. We're going to look at question two. Okay, for New Orleans shipped out more cotton than any other American city. Ivan, you want to read a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
All right, New Orleans shipped out more cotton than any other American city because it was cheaper and easier to raft bales down the Mississippi River than to send them overland to eastern ports. However, New York possessed several distinct advantages of its own that enabled its merchants to divert a significant part of that traffic through the East River waterfront of Manhattan. For one, New York commanded a much stronger regional market. Slave societies couldn't generate the same level of consumer demand for foreign manufacturers as did seaboard cities and Midwestern towns. So British buyers coming to New Orleans for cotton found themselves unable to sell their own exports as quickly or profitably as they could along Pearl Street or in Hanover Square. New York's attractiveness was enhanced by superior commercial infrastructure and abundant human resources. Ships, wharves, storehouses, auction rooms, sailors, cartmen, dock workers, which made it possible to move mammoth quantities of cotton directly to European mills more efficiently and reliably.
Okay, stop right there. So in your own words, Ivan, how would you answer New York being a strong regional market for British goods? What would be the simplest answer to that question? Given
they had the full infrastructure required to import and export large quantities of cotton.
That's question three. All right, so let's go to question three. The infrastructure, that's okay. The infrastructure and abundant human resources. Give it to me in your own words. How would you answer that in terms of how New York is sort of wedging itself into this trade route that where it shouldn't have been? What's the answer?
They had all the resources available to be able to cater to that market. They had, it says they had the ships, the wharves, the storehouses, auction rooms, the sailors, the cartmen, dock workers. So they had everything in place to be able to move large quantities.
And what's the quote? I always push you on quotes. You gave good examples. Give me the quote you would use in your answer to that question from that paragraph.
New York's attractiveness was enhanced by superior commercial infrastructure and abundant human resources.
Okay, and would you then give what examples would you use after that?
The ships, wharves, storehouses, auction rooms, sailors, carmen, dock workers.
Perfect, 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 perfect. And Saima, in terms of question 2, from what Ivan just read, what is this marketplace? What was New York sort of saying to the British manufacturers? Come here first with your manufactured goods, then take your boats south and pick up the cotton. What was New York saying in terms of this phrase, a strong regional market, from what Ivan just read and what I've been saying? What's at the heart of that? Simon. It's in that second sentence, which in the paragraph that he just read, for one, New York commanded a much stronger regional market. That's the key phrase I'm looking for, Simon. Are you there? Simon, are you with us?
Professor, what was the question again?
I'm asking, basically, I raised the question in question 2 about explain what the author or what I'm meaning about a strong regional market. What does that mean that New York has a marketplace that would attract the trade route from the British manufacturers?
Wouldn't that mean they just have a bigger like consumer market?
Joseph, you're absolutely right. And what's at the heart of that consumer market, Joseph? What makes New York so attractive to British manufacturers that they feel, oh, I can sell my textiles in New York and I won't be able to sell them in New Orleans? What is it that New York has to make that market so attractive?
I mean, the reading says they have a seaboard cities and Midwestern towns. So
and
I guess could it be that there's just more people and the transport is easier?
I want to add one thing I think you're right. I'm going to add one thing, and it's this sentence: slave societies couldn't generate the same level of consumer demand for foreign manufacturers as seaboard cities. So give me, in your own words, how compare the consumer demand in New York versus the consumer demand in New Orleans. What makes the difference? Joseph.
I guess it's like the environment, like down like I guess like in New York, cotton is not as like popular, so it makes it like it sort of like a rarity, I guess.
Narissa, jump in with the key phrase, and we got it. Go.
It's because the slaves in the South don't have money, and the consumers in New York, they have the money to buy the things from the ship.
Thank you, Joseph and Narissa. Great tag team. Okay, so everybody want to write this down? That this regional market, this attractiveness to this day, well, not with COVID, but to this day, the attractiveness of New York is our people who have money, like Carmela, the banker, right? People who are immigrants who are making a wage can buy the textiles, can buy the clothing, can buy the manufactured goods. Whereas for slaves, Narissa, what happens in the South with a slave society?
Well, they don't have any money, right? So they're not able to buy anything.
There it is, folks. So you're a manufacturer, right? Brian, you're a manufacturer, right? In Liverpool. Where are you gonna send your manufactured goods? New York or New Orleans?
New Orleans.
Huh?
New Orleans.
New Orleans. Why is that?
I don't know. It just sounded more attractive.
No, it would be New York. You would send it to New York where the people have money, Brian.
Oh, true. I got you. You see, this is why you're the banker and I'm not.
Your mind needs to be on the money, Brian.
I'm hiring Carmel as my accountant ASAP.
Where's your name?
I love it. I love it. I love it. The rest of you should write down this interaction, you, Brian and Carmela. It summarizes everything. It is the essence of New York. Brian's gonna initially wanting to send his boats to New Orleans. He's more attracted to New Orleans. It's warm there. It's beautiful there.
Retreat.
He wants to go to New Orleans himself this weekend, right? And Carmela, the banker, the New York banker, is like, wait a minute. You owe me money. I've got an IOU here. I want you to make money. You're sending those boats to New York. Oh, I love it. I love it.
Give me my money.
What?
Give me my money.
Give me my money. Run me my check, Brian.
Okay, it's 1:57. Let's take a 15-minute break. I'll see you in 15 minutes. You're too much fun, this class. I don't know why they even pay me to teach. I'll see you in 15 minutes.
Okay. Which paragraph?
Go down, go down. It's the last paragraph, the upshot. Yeah, that one. Okay, right there. Oh, we went too far. Lower it down. Yeah. The upshot. Yes. You're good.
Yeah, I see.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody with us? Okay. All right. Narissa, are you there? Hello, Narissa, are you with us? Oleg, did you mute everybody?
They mute automatically. They have to unmute by self.
Narissa, would you unmute yourself? Are you there? Is she back? No? Am I coming back too soon?
I don't know.
All right.
Looks like everybody here, but
everybody there? Jason, are you there?
Jason.
Hello, am I muted?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Okay, Jason, you're there. All right, and Narissa, you're not there? I guess she's not back yet. Okay. Hi, Atta. Okay, Jason, you want to do a little reading?
Sure.
All right. The upshot was the renowned Cotton Triangle.
Okay. The upshot was the renowned Cotton Triangle in which New York brokered the exchange of Southern cotton, and more important, the money from sales of Southern cotton from British manufacturers. For British manufacturers.
Yeah, just stop right there. Could you put that sentence into your own words, Jason?
Okay.
Just put that in your own words.
The money. Okay, so I know that it's saying that New York was, I guess, the middleman between for the South. Correct. So because of that, for the South, between the British and the South. So New York got money from that being the middleman in that situation.
Yeah, you're perfect. You're perfect. And thank you. And now I want to welcome our guest, Stephen Petrus. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Dr. Lieberman, and hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here, really honored to join in your class. So I really appreciate it. It's a very important topic, so I'm glad to be here.
Good. Oleg, can you get rid of the document for a minute so we can all see each other? Okay, can everybody now Want to give a welcome either through the chat or through your screen of waving hello to Stephen Petrus, a colleague of mine. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, everybody. Hi.
Hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, I'm very jealous of you taking this course. It's such an important course, and you're in great hands with Professor Lieberman.
Woo, 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 woo. Stephen Petrus, let me introduce him. He works with me at the archive. He is the historian at the archives. And he has a doctorate in U.S. American history. And his publications have been about music and about the village and about life in the village and about the music, particularly the musicians and the musical life of the village and cultural social history of Greenwich Village. So he is very cool. I'll just tell you, he's very cool. Stephen, I invited him today because I thought you'd be tired of me by now and you could use another historian to talk to and for me to talk to. So Stephen, I'm going to put you on the spot, which I love to do.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay.
So the class is talking about the Cotton Triangle. And what I've been saying, first of all, what I'd like you to sort of support me on or contradict me on is how the wealth of New York City then, and I would say even to this day, is based on an exploited slave labor of people of color. And as a historian, what's your take on that statement? And why do you think it's so radical to people? Why do you think that people are just so amazed by this?
Yes, all very important points, because we look at New York City as a beacon of progressivism, of values that we champion freedom. We're a place that welcomes immigrants historically from the very beginning. We have a certain set of values. And yet you look closer, you research this issue going back to the early 1800s in particular, and you see that New York merchants had strong ties to the Cotton South. As slavery was expanding in the United States, the cotton gin was developed that accelerated this trend in the 1790s. In the 1800s, 1810s, 1820s, slavery was booming in new states incorporated in the South, and New York merchants had close ties. New York banks had close ties to cotton plantations, helped fund them. And New York City itself became a focal point in this triangular trade. New York, as a coastal city, was connected to southern coastal cities like Charleston, New Orleans, where a lot of the material produced by slaves on these plantations, cotton in particular, was being shipped to New York and then over to England. So I think I heard when I joined, someone was mentioning New York as the middleman. And that is a really good way to describe it. And, New York certainly benefited economically from the slave trade. So we can't really look at the United States as this time as North versus South. Instead of looking at it in that way, we need to ask the questions, what were the ties? How did Northerners benefit from this institution? And as you know, slavery was dying in New York in the 1800s. Ultimately, it would end in 1827, but that process was set in motion much earlier in the 1780s and 1790s. And yet, New York merchants had strong ties to plantations in the South, and it really helped boost the city's economy.
Let me jump in and interrupt you. My apologies, but I have three things that are on my mind. First of all, what's your definition of the word merchant? Be careful, because we've been trying to define it in our class. So what's your definition of the word merchant?
Well, I think of merchant as like an entrepreneur, as one who is involved in economic transactions, someone who takes advantage of economic activity and is involved in trade, is involved in negotiation. So if you're a merchant in New York City in, say, 1830, for example, you might have an economic relationship with slave owners in the Deep South and with garment manufacturers in England. So you see how this is a transatlantic issue. You know, across the Atlantic, New York's ties with Britain, with the garment manufacturing industry in Britain, with Southern slaveholders. And these merchants have these economic ties, these economic relationships. Think of them as entrepreneurs who are negotiating sales, who are negotiating prices, who understand when ships are going back and forth from New York to Liverpool, England, you know, they have a great understanding and insight into this economic activity, and they're benefiting from it.
And we happen to have in our class a banker from New York who's come to the class, a banker from New York City in 1810, and a manufacturer from Liverpool in the class. So would you introduce yourselves to Stephen, the banker, and the manufacturer in Liverpool?
Are you talking about me? Okay, I'm the banker. I'm trying to make money off of this person who is asking for money from me. He's like, let me borrow some money. And I'm like, cool, I'm down to give you my money. But also, like, I'm going to charge interest so I can make money off of your money. And from what I understand from Professor, I am also then selling or trading his money to other people. As like, what is it called?
Bill of exchange.
Futures?
Bill of exchange. You've got a piece of paper.
Yeah. What did you call it? Like a futures or something?
That's today's terms, the futures market. But
yeah. Okay. Cool.
In your
and also, Professor was like, where would you want to send your merch to? And Brian, I think, said like New Orleans. And I was like, no, you cannot send it to New Orleans. You have to send it to New York because that's where the money is.
And Stephen, this supports what you're saying, because as the merchant, as the person interested, she's going to tell him where he's going to make his money. And she's very interested in that because she's got paper from him. Brian, you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. And what was tell us about your role in this triangle. Who are you?
I was going to New Orleans, but Carmela redirected me.
Yeah, and how come? How come?
Because I was in the wrong and I wasn't gonna make money, so
You see how this fits nicely with what Professor Petrus, Dr. Petrus is saying. That's exactly what happens. They start to sort of say, wait a minute, I understand what's happening, and you take those boats to New York.
Yeah.
That's where you
Well, I was going to New Orleans, but Miss Carmela said, let's go to New York.
There's no money there. There's a lot of fun, but there's no money.
So now I have a question, Stephen, for you, which I really don't understand, so you're going to have to help me with it. On the triangle, this triangle trade route, the boats are tell me, in your mind, what is the triangle? I mean, I've got this triangle in my mind. So just describe, because the class has question 6 where they have to describe the triangle. So they're going to take notes on this. So give them the answer. That's what I'm saying. Give them the answer.
The triangle here, are New York City and southern coastal ports. I think Charleston is important too, in South Carolina and New Orleans. And in England, Liverpool in particular, because there was a transatlantic packet service where these ships would go across on a regular schedule from New York to Liverpool. And you as a merchant, you knew the schedule and you knew what commodities were arriving and what would be sent, and you helped dictate that. New York merchants, I would say, were particularly aggressive in this way, more so than maybe Southerners. And so they came to dominate this triangle, if you will. So think of it from the major port cities of the South, as you say, New Orleans and Charleston, New York City to Liverpool, and who's kind of, and we have it all regulated. It's not random, but it's on a schedule. We know what's being delivered and when and what to expect, when to expect them to come. So yeah,
I understand this part of the triangle, which is the boats going up the seaboard from, let's say, Charleston or New Orleans, coming up to New York, and then going over to Liverpool. But what's the other part of the triangle? This one, that's what I don't understand. Complete the triangle for me.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't think it was maybe literally that way, a triangle from Liverpool to maybe some of the garments produced in the factories in the UK, in London, in Manchester, and Liverpool would be brought back and sold in the United States. Perhaps to other cities too, like Philadelphia and Boston. These were significant cities in the Northeast. Not as significant as New York in terms of economic dominance. As we know, New York would become the economic capital of the United States by 1825. But it was more, not literally a triangle, I don't think.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'm going to now follow this class. I'm going to make a guess, an educated guess, a hypothesis. And Stephen, you tell me whether this is worth looking into. That I've got the triangle, I've got the top half, boats coming from Liverpool to New York with manufactured goods, New York having a consumer market, Philadelphia nearby, those manufactured goods being sold. Then the boats go down, dropping off maybe some manufactured goods and picking up some cotton, going down, going down, going down. And then, okay, here's my hypothesis, that the boats then have dropped off manufacturers, picked up cotton, and then they go back to Liverpool with the cotton. They don't come up to New York again. They go straight across, and that's the bottom half of the triangle where they're bringing the cotton, the raw cotton that they've picked up from these southern cities, and they're going to the manufacturers in Liverpool, which then get made into the linens, all the manufacturers, and then they come back across with the manufactured goods, and it starts again. What do you think of that theory?
Yeah, I think there's truth to it. I think, it wasn't 100% from New York to the UK. So yeah, the other ports, there was a lot of bustling activity, a lot of activity from the East Coast of the United States to the UK. So I'm buying that thesis. And I also want to mention that other important cities were Savannah, Georgia, and Mobile, Alabama, too, in addition to Charleston and New Orleans. So I'm thinking of 4 major cities in the South. Again, Charleston, South Carolina, Mobile, Alabama, Savannah, Georgia, New Orleans, Louisiana, all connected. So like the cotton is being produced in the interior in states like Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, being shipped, brought to the coasts, and all of this activity. There's just a lot of hustle and bustle happening in the early 1800s in the United States. And again, think of New York as the focal point of it.
Yeah, the focal point of hustle and bustle. That's who we are.
Yeah.
That's our history. I mean, if anybody's writing down notes, I think that's the thing to pick up on what Petrus just said. That is the quote, that there's this hustle and bustle happening, and guess who's at the focal point? Guess who's at the middle of it? Guess who remains at the middle of it?
I have a question.
Yes, Christian.
Okay, due to all of this process, now how are slaves affected by this?
Stephen, what do you think? It's a great
question. Christian, it's a great question. Think of cotton as white gold. Cotton as white gold. And as the cotton plantations expanded, as the cotton industry expanded, Christian, slavery became immensely profitable. There was even a term for it, King Cotton. So the impact of this economic activity on the slaves made it even harsher for the slaves. The southern states were even more committed to slavery as a result, because they themselves were profiting, they were expanding. The South had a vision to expand the nation to the West Coast as we know it today, and the new territories that would be incorporated as states, they wanted them to become slave states, you know, because they wanted to expand slavery. They even had ambitions to expand slavery into parts of Central America, as we know it today. So slavery became harsher, it became more embedded. Slave states, slave politicians from the southern states became that much more committed to it, and they would not give it up. They would not give it up without, honestly, a civil war, as we know. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the impact, slavery expanded because it became that much more profitable because of this activity that we're describing.
All right, any more questions before we move on to question 7, which
No.
I want to go over with Professor Petrus. Any more questions?
So that meant that slavery was even worse than what it was at the beginning. Am I correct?
Yeah, it was equally brutal on the individual slaves, but as a form of labor, Christian, it expanded. You know, there were more plantations being developed. The country was expanding westward, and so the slavery was expanded as a labor system. It was always brutal. It was physically brutal, and I think, in my view, the worst aspect of it was the slave trade, where children were being sold from their families. It's hard to even comprehend, but that had always existed, but now it's just increasing. It's increasing as a form of labor. I think
of it as add to that New York was very supportive of this expansion. That New York, if you think about it, was making money, and the expansion of the cotton industry, the expansion of slavery, and Stephen, you know, jump in when you want to correct me, was so popular in New York that New York City, and you could write this down, doesn't vote for Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln loses in New York. You look at the election results for Abraham Lincoln in New York City in both elections, and Lincoln loses here for the reasons we're talking about in this class. Stephen, what do you think?
That's absolutely right, Professor Lieberman. In fact, the mayor of New York at the time, Fernando Wood, it sounds odd today, but he wanted to secede. He even proposed to secede from the North and maybe form New York as its own entity, as its own state. So we've got Democrats in New York, you know, part of what we call the Tammany Hall political machine. And we've got Republicans. The Republicans in New York supported Lincoln, but they were outnumbered by the Democrats. And the Democrats were highly influential because you had powerful merchants supporting the Democratic leadership. And also you had a mass of immigrants coming in, particularly from Ireland, who would be supportive of Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall would reach out to them and get their votes. But again, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but New York was a divided city on the eve of the Civil War in 1860.
And Daisy, did you have a question?
Thank you.
Daisy?
Oh, I was just saying, we're starting to sound like Texas, because didn't they want to succeed too from like the United States?
Yes, and let me pick up on that. Stephen, let me ask you this question. It's not fair, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you see New York in this time period as a southern city?
I do and I don't. And I don't mean to give you a waffling answer. I don't, because New York was committed to manufacturing. New York was committed also to free labor in the city. And let me explain what I mean by the term free labor. It might sound obvious, but to the students, basically the idea was, and this comes from Hamilton, and it goes to all the way up to Abraham Lincoln, and Henry Clay is another individual there you might talk about later in this course. Basically, the notion is you as a worker, You deserve to get paid for your labor. And you should have the opportunity to ascend, to improve your class status. There should be a degree of upward mobility in New York City, in the North. You work, you get paid, maybe you improve your class status. And you also are a consumer. You work, you get paid, you purchase goods, and putting money back into the economy stimulates further economic activity. And New York is committed to this idea. Now let's look at the South.
Let me just stop you a minute there. Narissa, you want to jump in and tell Professor Petrus what you said earlier about consumers in New York?
Yes, I said earlier that the merchants wouldn't go to the South because the slaves don't have any money, so they're not able to purchase anything.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of saying it. And I like to boil history down to kind of these basic thoughts. And thank you for this comment. Slaves worked, but they didn't get paid. I know it sounds basic, but let me break it down to you work, you didn't get paid, and so there's no money being injected back into the economy. Now, what you're dependent on is expanding slavery, is adding more land, more territory into the South. And again, as the country was expanding westward, Southern leaders were keen on bringing more states in as slave states. So there wasn't that same commitment to manufacturing. So Professor Lieberman, your question, is New York a Southern city? Well, it was in the sense that merchants were very much connected to plantations, and banks were connected to plantations, but not in what kind of labor we champion. People like Frederick Law Olmsted, who was one of the founders of Central Park and Brooklyn's Prospect Park, really believed in the virtue of free labor.
So let me just ask you a question, Stephen. Bringing it to the present, do you see Biden's bailout, the federal bailout, as part of the same theme of supporting the consumers, supporting what we're talking about in terms of wage laborers in New York? Do you see this? Do you see this federal policy now of $1,400? Do you see that in that tradition?
I do, absolutely. I think it's a great point, Professor Lieberman, to connect the present to the past, because what we're all talking about when you get to the essence here is the role of government. The role of government to stimulate economic activity. And this goes with the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal was supported in part by New York State. And the Transcontinental Railroad in the mid-19th century. And if you talk about the Highway Act of 1956, when Eisenhower was president, basically the role of the government was to build this kind of infrastructure. It was canals, railroads, highways in the 1950s up until today, getting checks, stimulus checks to help revive the economy. So I think I'm like you, Professor Lieberman. I look at American history through an economic lens, and I think that's the right way of doing it. We can talk about what's moral and what's immoral. That's fine, and slavery is immoral. We all know that. But a lot of these debates centered around economic questions.
We're basically New Yorkers, Stephen.
This is how I see the world, folks.
We do in New York. We do in New York. It doesn't matter where the capital is. We are the center of capital, right?
We are a global economic capital,
right?
And we should not lose sight of that.
Anybody have any questions before we move on? Because Stephen and I are going to look at question 7, but anybody have any questions on the first 6 questions you want to ask us, either through the chat or just say it out? We're all good? Okay, Oleg, we're going to go to that, I don't know if you call it a handout, but the attachment, what I call 100A, which is actually my using my phone to copy a page in the book. Can you put that up, and Stephen and I will start responding to it? This is question 7. This is a paragraph or so from Restless City. And I'm sorry about the poor quality, but it's the best I can do. Atta, can you read it? Are you there?
Yes, Professor.
Okay, so why don't we start with the election of John Jay as governor of New York State in 1795. You see that second paragraph there?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you're a little bass, but I can hear you. Yeah.
Awesome. Actually, let me fix up my headphones. Sorry about this.
Yeah. I don't hear you. No, it's got.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about this.
Right, it's okay.
The election of John Jay as governor of New York State in 1975 set the stage for a contentious, extended debate over emancipation. I'm sorry, what happened?
The sound is bad. Let's go to another student. Sorry about that, but the sound quality. Arbaz, do you have good connection?
I think so. I'm not sure, but
You sound great. Atta, we're going to switch to Arbaz because he's got a better audio connection. So
No worries.
Start reading with the election of John Jay.
sure. The election of John Jay as governor of New York State in 1795 set the stage for a contentious, extended debate over emancipation. The solution was a compromised gradual Emancipation Act by which all children born of slaves after July 4th, 1799 would be considered free. Nonetheless, they would continue to serve their parents' masters until age 24 if female and until age 28 if male. Existing slaves were not freed, but children, the aged and the sick could be released to the local overseers of the poor. As a result, some slaves were abandoned and many were sold in order to avoid financial loss later. Others managed to buy themselves or negotiate work agreements premised on freedom. Slavery began to die in New York City, although equality remained elusive and racial violence was hardly over.
All right, Arbaz, in your own words, what happens in New York in 1799? Just in your own words and looking at what you just read.
There was a gradual Emancipation Act where children born of slaves after July 4th, 1799 would be considered free. However, they would continue to serve their parents' masters until age 24 if they were female and age 28 if male. Existing slaves, however, were not freed.
Yeah, go ahead. What about the children?
Yeah, but the children aged and sick could be released to the overseers of the poor. And overall, most were abandoned slaves and many were sold. And so slavery did begin to die in New York, but in terms of racial prejudice and the violence that occurred, that still remained.
So let me push you a little bit. What's your personal reaction to all of this, just in your own thoughts? Everything that you read and you just said, what's your Arbaz take, your Arbaz reaction to this? Just your thoughts.
I think the way it's worded is much nicer than what it really was. I think that even though it says that this act was put into place, as it says, many were sold and many were abandoned. So it did help, but I mean, the slaves still suffered in the end, you know? So I guess to me, it's kind of like a double-edged sword there.
I love it. I love it. Can you repeat what you just said so others can take down the notes? Because you do a brilliant way of combining your own thoughts and giving examples. I'm sorry to push you like this, but I'd like others to quote you so you can quote Arbaz. Take it from the top in terms of when you started saying much nicer than it really was. I love that phrase. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my thoughts on this were that the text phrased the the Gradual Emancipation Act as being nicer than it actually was. And we see that because towards the end of the paragraph, it states that many of the slaves were either abandoned or sold, and that even though slavery was technically began to die in New York, racial violence was still a big thing. Yeah.
And I'm sorry to push you. Can you bring it to the present?
I would say that, yeah, I mean, it says here in the last sentence, if I had to quote it, slavery began to die in New York City, although equality remained elusive and racial violence was hardly over. And that extends even to today. We can see that through, the police brutality and also through equality. Yeah, I mean, equality is a big issue, not only in the New York, but throughout the US.
Brilliant, brilliant. Arbaz, brilliant, brilliant. Oleg, you can bring us back as a class. You can get rid of the document. And Stephen Petrus, Dr. Petrus, I'm going to go to you now for your reaction to what Arbaz has read and what he has said. And those of you taking notes can quote Dr. Stephen Petrus. Stephen, you're on.
Well, Arbaz is a hard act to follow because I do agree with it. And I think he was really articulate. And I thank you, Arbaz, for your interpretation and analysis. And I do want to make the point that, yeah, 1799 is a pivotal year, sort of accelerates the decline of slavery, which would ultimately end in New York by 1827. But that time period between 1799 and 1827, what was happening? One big thing that was happening, and it only basically briefly alluded to it, that paragraph that Arbaz read, was that I think slaveholders in New York realized that slavery would no longer be profitable here, as profitable as it might have been. And so consequently, they sold slaves. Many were sold to plantations in the West Indies, in the Caribbean. And so, this is a really devastating aspect. I return to my point earlier, the slave trade, slaves being sold in the country, in the region, in the Caribbean. So many indeed were sold. And, when you sell a slave, you're breaking up families. So this is really one of the most heartbreaking aspects of it, is what occurred. But I think to add to what Arbaz said, to me, this really reflects New York's commitment to a different kind of economy. We're going away from the slave economy. We're going towards a free labor economy where New York is increasingly committed to manufacturing, to nurturing and developing infant manufacturing activities. And New York, small shops, where artisans and craftsmen and skilled laborers and unskilled laborers were working in newly emerging industries. So we're seeing a real shift away from slavery to what Hamilton imagined, is that the economy, the government was meant to stimulate manufacturing so that each individual, you could reach your potential. You could reach your potential as a worker. And you could, enter an industry, develop your skills, and, make a living and be a consumer and inject money back into the economy. That's sort of what we're seeing here with the demise of slavery.
Let me interrupt you, Stephen, for a minute and ask you an unfair question again. Do you see in our history that New York likes to have it both ways? That what you're saying is sort of an example of the quintessential New York attitude, that we want to move away from slavery, have manufacturing, have a wage earning class, and yet at the same time, we want to profit from slavery. It's like, we're clean, we're moving away from slavery, but hold on a minute, hold on a minute. You're making a profit on slavery. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, no, that's the complexity of history. And I'm really happy, Professor Lieberman, that you emphasize history isn't so cut and dried. It's not so easy. It's not good guys versus bad guys. People, we are complex individuals. New Yorkers were always complex. So on the one hand, you show a commitment to economic development, the construction of roads, the construction of bridges. The Erie Canal is the great example of that in 1817 to 1825 when it was completed. So that really shows that we are going to foster trade. We're going to foster regional economic development by the Great Lakes in upstate New York. But on the other hand, we're also profiting from the expansion of slavery in the South. So it might seem like, how can you have both? Well, you can. And that is why this is New York City history is complex. And that's why I never liked it when I heard students say, well, the North was free, the South was slave. And I understood their point. And on some level, okay, I get it. But on another level, let's dig deeper. And that's why we're in this classroom, is to understand exactly how different interest groups benefited from different activities happening in the country at the time. So, yeah.
Let me ask you one thing that ties it back to what we've been working on. Is what role does Alexander Hamilton play in this history that we're talking about? What, as you as a historian, what role do you see Alexander Hamilton playing in the role of freeing slaves, getting rid of slavery in New York State, and yet New York City still having its hand on the profit? Where does Hamilton fit in that history?
Hamilton plays a central role. Hamilton is a central, essential figure in New York City history, in American history. I would say Hamilton is one of maybe the 3 or 4 most important New Yorkers in our history, along with maybe Peter Stuyvesant, DeWitt Clinton, Robert Moses, just to name a few, because Hamilton, again, during the American Revolution in the 1770s and 1780s was a pivotal figure. He was an aide to George Washington. He supported the formation of the Constitution. In 1787, wrote some of the Federalist Papers to encourage New Yorkers to ratify the Constitution. And what I'm getting at is Hamilton's vision, the role of government, again, to stimulate manufacturing activity so that each individual, Black or white, you could reach your full potential in his society. That was his vision. It didn't happen in his lifetime, it was cut short, obviously, but that was his ultimate vision, that you, an immigrant, a native-born New Yorker, Black or white, you could reach your full potential as a worker, and you would get compensated. You can demonstrate your skills in our expanding economic activity. He looked to slavery and he said, this is not happening because slaves are degraded. They are exploited. Their work is being stolen from them. And it's not a dynamic economy that Hamilton imagined.
But what would Hamilton, the believer in banks, say to Carmela, the banker, who's making money, on this slave trade? Well, what would Hamilton say to those bankers in New York who are profiting from this slave labor? What do you think Hamilton would say to these bankers?
You always ask the best questions. What would Hamilton say to bankers like Carmela who are profiting from slavery? Of course,
she's dealing with plantation owner Lieberman. She's dealing with Brian, a manufacturer in Liverpool, right? So she's the banker. Hamilton, as we know, is big on banks. Okay, what's Mr. Hamilton going to say about all this? Mr. I'm against slavery.
I think Hamilton, and again, he did support the creation of a first national bank. He was Secretary of Treasury under the first president, George Washington. So you're absolutely right. I think he would be critical of Carmela. No. Not Carmela as a person, but the whole system that Carmela was involved in, embedded in, because he looked at slavery as a backwards kind of economy. Slave labor, again, did not reward the worker. The worker was exploited and degraded in many ways. So I think Hamilton would have, like Abraham Lincoln and Henry Clay, would have continued to advocate for the abolition of slavery, probably in a gradual way, because I don't think he wasn't an abolitionist in the sense of Frederick Douglass or others, but more in a gradual way.
So in our last 4 minutes, use the chat room, and I'd like everybody to write down a thought they're having about this class today, or a question they have, so that Stephen Petrus and Richard Lieberman can get a sense and take a feel of what you're really responding to in this class. So everybody take the next few minutes and in the chat room, write down what you're thinking. What's your reaction to everything that's been said in the last 2 hours, in the last half hour, that's really struck you as a person, as a New Yorker, as a student, that has really either enlightened you, confused you, excited you, made you curious? Just take a few minutes and put something in the chat room, okay? Go ahead. Okay, it's 3 o'clock. Those of you who put something in the chat, I'll see you in 2 days. I'll see you Thursday. The rest of you, before you leave, please put something in the chat, and then you can head out, and I'll see you on Thursday. So to all of you, this was fabulous. To Stephen Petrus, a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
So great. What a treat. What a treat. See you all Thursday. What a great class. Put something in the chat before you leave.
Okay.